Hello and welcome. I am Excellent and this is my channel. Today we're going to discuss two unsolved murders of two women that took place in the Shenandoah National Parks. Let's get started, shall we? On Sunday, May 19th, 1996, Julie Williams, who was 24 years old, and Lollie Winans, who was 26, left their home with their golden retriever, Taj, to hike through the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. During their stay in the park, they were brutally murdered at a calm site. Despite suspicions that a Columbia, Maryland man was the perpetrator, the case fell apart. The FBI is still investigating the murders of Julie and Lollie, but 25 years have passed, and the case is still open and unsolved. Lollie was from a wealthy family in Michigan, but her friends describe her personality as being really down to earth, easy to get along with. She rejected the privilege of her birth. After she graduated from high school, Lollie dropped out of college. In 1994, she moved to Maine and attended Unity College. She also worked as a wilderness guide. According to one journalist, people described Lollie as a microbrew drinking, fish following, fish as in the band, cigarette smoking, good time girl. Julie, whose first name was Julianne, loved sports and geology. She was passionate about helping her community. She had won the Minnesota State double tennis championship in high school, and then she went on to travel Europe in college. She studied the extinction of dinosaurs. She graduated summa cum laude, and she spoke fluent Spanish. She was a well-rounded young woman. She was working in a bookstore in Burlington, Vermont, and was about to begin a new job in Lake Champlain, Vermont, on June 1st, 1996. Julie and Lollie met at a charity in 1994. It was called Woodswomen in Minnesota. Woodswomen, Inc. was a non-profit organization focusing on the education and adventure travel run by women for women out of Minneapolis from 1977 to 1999. It is often referred to as the grandmother of women's outdoor adventure groups, and it was the first adventure travel company serving exclusively women, and it served in its time more than 8,000 women and 1,200 children. Their strapline was, "Adventure is the best souvenir." Despite coming from very different backgrounds, the women developed a relationship. They both loved hiking and spending time in the outdoors. It was their mutual passion. On the day they went on their hiking trip to Shenandoah National Park, after a day of walking, Julie and Lollie pitched their tent off of one of Shenandoah National Park's horse trails, and they settled down for the night. They chose a peaceful spot next to a mountain stream near the Bridle Trail, which is a part of the horse trail system that runs from Big Meadows to Skyland. The Shenandoah National Park was founded on December 26, 1935, and it stretches for more than 100 miles along the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is located between the Shenandoah Valley in the west and the Piedmont region in the east. It is about 75 miles from Washington, D.C., and it covers an area of 197,411 acres, and it includes mountain streams, more than 500 miles of hiking trails, and almost 80,000 acres of designated wilderness. One of the park's most famous features is the Skyline Drive. It was constructed in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and it has 105 miles of scenic overlooks, trailheads, picnic areas, and campgrounds between Front Royal in the north and Rockfish Gap in the south. Also, another way to cross the length of the Shenandoah is by hiking the 100 or so miles of the Appalachian Trail that run across the park. It was the weekend after Memorial Day that Lollie and Julie went. So it was a really busy day for hikers and sightseers. It was on May 31st that Julie's dad, Thomas Williams, alerted the authorities that Julie and Lollie were missing. So park rangers went out to go look for them. They found their car parked near Skyland Lodge and then began a search of the nearby trails. They quickly found Taj, who was walking around without a leash, but there was no sign of the two women. Bridget Bonet, who was Deputy Chief Ranger at the Shenandoah National Park, said, "We started doing hasty searches to cover all of the trail corridors in the general area to see if we could locate them. At some point during those hasty searches, we did locate the dog. It was on June 1st that the searchers came across a camp, and it was about a half a mile away from their vehicle. And there were the bodies of Julie and Lollie." National Park Service lead investigator Tim Alley said that Lollie was found inside the tent. Like Julie, she had been gagged. Her hands had been bound with duct tape. A duct tape that, oddly, had been first used to tape Julie's mouth, and her throat had been slit. Unlike Julie, her ankles were also bound. Both were partially undressed, yet neither woman had been assaulted in a certain kind of way, or at least there had been no male proof on their bodies that they had been assaulted. Julie's body, along with her sleeping bag and a sleeping pad, was found approximately 30 to 40 feet away down a little embankment. Bonet explains that one of the backcountry regulations at the time was that backpackers who had to camp must camp away from designated trails, via roads, and developed areas. She's quoted as saying it wasn't a heavily used or heavily traveled trail. They were following the backcountry regulations at the time, which required them to be out of sight, which is why they weren't found easily on the first day of the search. A camera was discovered at the camp, and it had photos of their hike along the White Oak Canyon Trail. They also climbed Hawksbill, which is the highest mountain in Shenandoah, just before they pitched camp for the last time, a few days after they entered the park. So, what did the Park Service do after they found the bodies and they knew that the women had been murdered? Well, they waited 36 hours to announce the murders. And this, even though the park was completely full of visitors who were then left at a high risk. Now, I want to take a moment here to talk about the fact that they took 36 hours to announce the brutal murders of two women before they bothered to tell any visitors, to warn anyone that there was a possibility that if they set up camp, they could be brutally murdered, or even hiking on the trail. One possible reason for this is money. As of 2014, the national parks support 277,000 jobs. Patrons contributed $10.3 billion, $17.1 billion in value added, and $29.7 billion in output. I think that explains a lot about why so many people don't know about so many of the missing people that simply vanish in national parks, the brutal unsolved murders. the strange disappearances that just don't have an explanation. You look at the money, and I don't think we have to wonder. When the announcement was finally made, acting park superintendent Greg Stiles called it an isolated incident. Now, normally, an isolated incident would be murder-suicide. A friend, somebody you know who the perpetrator was. The victim and the perpetrator knew each other somehow, family, friends. That would be an isolated incident. An isolated incident is not two women brutally murdered for apparently no particular reason. And they announced that without providing any basis for such a statement. The FBI announced shortly afterwards that the murders appeared to be random. And what does that mean exactly? It appeared to be that they were two young women alone, off a trail, where they were required to not be seen by any other hikers or visitors to the park. Is that random? Or is that somebody who's hunting? And again, all this was said to calm the fears of the visitors. Not many people want to go camping in a park next to a brutal murder scene. Take that risk, right? So, it's random. It's isolated. And because so many people visited the park in 1996, 1.57 million people, it was going to be pretty hard to solve this crime. Shenandoah National Park is an exclusive federal jurisdiction, which means that only the federal government has law enforcement authority. Bonet is quoted as saying, "Our law enforcement staff was involved in the initial crime scene security. We had special agents that are part of the National Park Service handling the investigation in conjunction with the FBI. We also work with the Virginia State Police Crime Scene Unit to have them come along and process the crime scene along with the FBI because at the time we did not have the equipment." On July 9th, 1997, Yvonne Malbasha was a tourist from Canada, and she was cycling south on the Skyline Drive. And she was on a mountainous road. She was admiring the Blue Ridge views. She had become separated from her friend, but there appeared to be no reason for concern. The park seemed like an ideal spot for a bicycling vacation for the two Canadians. And besides, they'd never even heard of Julie Williams or Lollie Winans. Suddenly, Yvonne was forced off the road at milepost 57.5 and off her bike by a man driving a truck. He became extremely angry and he threw a soda can at her. He grabbed at her chest and screamed, "Show me your titties." This man got out and he tried to wrestle her into his truck, but she threw her water bottle at him and she used her bike as a blocking device. She subsequently said, "The vehicle came so close, I could actually feel the heat of the engine." Malbasha was able to fight off the man, and she took cover behind a tree as the man re-entered his truck and tried numerous times to run her over. Eventually, he gave up and sped away. The first motorist to appear was a ranger with a mobile phone, and they quickly sent out a description. Park rangers quickly apprehended the attacker, and he was later identified as Daryl David Rice. He was attempting to leave the park. Later, when the investigators searched his vehicles, they found hand and leg restraints hidden inside. He had changed his clothes, and he had reattached the license plates he'd removed while he was stalking Yvonne. The attacker was stopped within sight of the Swift Run Gap exit, which offered anonymity and escape. Malbasha was able to identify her assailant, who was then arrested and taken into custody. At the time, Rice was in his late 20s, and he was living in Columbia, Maryland. He was single with no children. Although he had no previous criminal record, Rice was fired from his job at Maryland's MCI System House in June of 1997 because he was extremely hostile at work. Rice's former co-workers told investigators that he yelled sexual and other profanities at them. He punched a hole in the wall of the men's bathroom, stole their lunches, bumped into them so that they'd spill their coffee, and took down one woman's picture and threw it in the trash. In 1998, Rice pleaded guilty to the attempted abduction of Yvonne Malbasha. He was sentenced to 135 months in Petersburg, Virginia Federal Penitentiary. Interviews after his arrest led prosecutors to believe that Rice could have been involved with the Julie and Lollie murders. He became a possible suspect for a variety of reasons, including the geographic location, the predatory behavior exhibited, and the exclusive selection of female victims. Videos also happened to show Rice entering the park at Front Royal at 8:05 p.m. on May 25th, and again at Rockfish Gap at 4:57 p.m. on May 26th. He returned with his friends Carl and Robert Ruckert on June 1st. Rice denied that he was in the park on May 25th and May 26th, but he did admit that he was there on June 1st. With this circumstantial evidence to go on April 10th, 2001, Attorney General John Ashcroft announced the indictment of Darrell David Rice in the murder of Julie Williams and Lollie Winans. In a news conference announcing Rice's indictment, prosecutors alleged that Rice has stated on several occasions that he enjoys assaulting women because they are, in his words, more vulnerable than men. Additionally, prosecutors stated that Rice said that the women deserved to die because they were gay. In 1999, the FBI had placed an undercover agent with Rice at the Federal Correction Center in Petersburg and taped their conversations. In one, Rice admitted, quote, that he has only engaged in 2 sexual relationships with women, the last occurring in 1991. He was 31 at the time. Rice also allegedly stated on tape that he was an inadequate lover, that he couldn't find a girlfriend, and that he substituted pornography for a sexual relationship. Gary Barnett, who was a fellow inmate, claimed that Rice was into, quote, crazy porn, and that his magazines were, quote, kinky shite. One, he said, featured a woman tied to a chair with a ball in her mouth, tape over the ball. Rice was treated for substance abuse at Health Management Systems, Inc. in Annapolis, in Maryland, in February of 1996. Rice was charged with 4 counts of capital murder, 2 of which alleged he selected his victims based on their sexual orientation. Because he was charged with a hate crime, his indictment invoked a federal sentencing enhancement, meaning he could receive the death penalty. However, he was never sentenced. Though prosecutors spent years building the case against Rice, they lacked any forensic evidence. And then, in October of 2003, a hair found at the crime scene was tested. DNA results indicated that it did not match Rice or either of the women. Before October 2003, the only DNA prosecutors had was mitochondrial DNA from the cloth ligatures. Mitochondrial DNA can determine the person's sex, in this case male, but cannot produce a specific profile. In October, however, prosecutors learned that an additional hair had been discovered on the duct tape used to bind Lollie's wrists, which was then subjected to a new type of DNA test called YSTR. It showed that there was a good chance that Rice was not the source of the DNA. And that meant that the only evidence was circumstantial, and Rice's defense was prepared to vigorously dispute each and every aspect of the government's case. In their February 19th motion, Rice's attorneys charged prosecutorial misconduct and argued that in addition to the DNA results, there were 4 major problems with the government's case. The first one, statements allegedly made by a couple camping in the park the night the women were murdered. Next, a call Rice had made to a gay rights center in California on May 28th. The next, an audio tape submitted by the government to support its claims that Rice hated gays. Next, alleged attempts by government investigators to manipulate or pressure witnesses who saw the women in the park. After that, the case fell apart, and on February 25th, 2004, Judge Moon dismissed the charges against Daryl David Rice without prejudice, meaning he could still be charged on a later date. At the time, Rice was also facing suspicion in the death of Alicia Showalter Reynolds, but he was never charged in that case either. On March 2nd, 1996, at around 7:30 a.m., Alicia Showalter Reynolds said goodbye to her husband and got in her car, a Mercury Tracer. She was driving from Baltimore to Charlottesville, which is about 155 miles. She was going to shop with her mother, Sadie. Alicia, who was a Johns Hopkins University graduate student, never arrived to see her mother. When too much time had passed, Sadie called Alicia's husband, Mark. Soon, Alicia's car was discovered near Culpeper County. It was on the shoulder of the southbound highway. Apparently, somebody had placed a white napkin on the car to indicate that she had had car trouble, but upon inspection, nothing was wrong with her car. On May 15th, Alicia's remains were found outside Lingnum, about 15 miles from the location where her car was found. Investigators did not reveal how she died, but they did say she likely was murdered the day she was abducted. Because the murder of Julie and Lollie is still an active investigation, the FBI will not discuss any persons of interest. No one has been convicted of the murders, and Rice was originally due to be released from the Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City on July 17th, 2007. The last reported sighting of Rice was in 2014, when police in Durango, Colorado, began receiving calls from frightened residents saying that they'd seen him in the area. Durango Police Chief Jim Spratland said people were overreacting, adding, "All I know is he's not wanted, and we ain't looking for him." Nice. Then there was another man, Richard Winans. He had been considered a suspect in the Shenandoah National Park murders. He died by suicide in 2002 after police connected him to 3 other murders. However, forensic evidence has not confirmed Winans' potential involvement in this case. In the years that followed the discovery of the women's bodies, the National Park Service and the FBI joined forces to conduct a nationwide search for their killer, including following up on an estimated 15,000 leads. But in 2020, the case had remained unsolved. Thank you for coming to this channel. If you are interested in unsolved crimes, disappearances in national parks, and the paranormal, then this is the place for you. Please go ahead and subscribe. Also, if you could give this video a thumbs up, I'd greatly appreciate it. Good night.